You open a map app and type in a city 3,000 miles away. It loads in half a second. You barely notice. But 2,000 years ago, a piece of news could travel that same distance in about a month, carried by a man on a horse, changing riders every 25 miles, day and night, without stopping. That network was not an accident. It was the Roman Empire. And the real answer to how big it actually was is far stranger than a number on a map. You've probably seen the shape before. That familiar outline hugging the Mediterranean, stretching from Britain down to North Africa, from Spain across to the Middle East. You glance at it in a textbook. You move on. But glancing at a map is not the same as understanding scale. Your brain is not built to process distance the way it processes a photograph. It compresses. It flattens. So let's stop compressing it. At its height, under the Emperor Trajan in the year 117, the Roman Empire covered roughly 2 million square miles. That is close to the entire land area of the modern United States, minus Alaska. It stretched across 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia, all under a single administrative system, a single currency, and largely a single language for law and trade. Here is where it gets strange. You could walk from Hadrian's Wall in northern England to the banks of the Euphrates River in modern Iraq, and never leave Roman territory. That is roughly the same distance as walking from New York to Los Angeles, and then continuing on for another 1,000 miles. All of it, one empire. All of it, connected by roads. And those roads were not simple dirt paths. The Romans built over 250,000 miles of road, of which about 50,000 were paved with stone. Engineers such as those studied by historian Ray Lawrence, who spent years mapping the logistics of Roman infrastructure, have shown that these roads were built with layered foundations, drainage systems, and mile markers, some of which are still visible in parts of Europe today. You could travel from one end of the empire to the other on a system so consistent that a soldier trained in Britain could march down a road engineered the exact same way in Syria. Why does that matter? Because infrastructure is invisible until you need it. Think about the last time your internet went down for an hour. Frustrating, right? Now imagine an empire that ran its economy, its military, and its mail on physical roads for 400 years, without those roads failing. The population tells its own story. At its peak, the empire may have held somewhere between 50 and 90 million people. Historian Peter Fibiger-Bang, whose research focuses on ancient economic systems, has argued that a more conservative estimate puts the number close to 60 million. Whichever figure you accept, that means roughly 1 in every 4 or 5 humans alive on Earth at the time was living under Roman rule. 1 in 4. Try picturing that. It would be like one single government today controlling the entire population of Europe, Africa, and South America combined. But scale isn't just about land or people. It's about what moves through that land. Grain grown in Egypt fed the city of Rome, 1,000 miles away, delivered by ships that crossed the Mediterranean on predictable seasonal routes. Historian and archaeologist Andrew Wilson, known for his work reconstructing ancient trade networks through shipwreck data, has estimated that hundreds of thousands of tons of grain moved from Egypt to Italy every single year. That's not a local farmer's market. That is an industrial supply chain, running without engines, without trucks, without electricity. Now picture the city of Rome itself. At its peak, it held around 1 million residents. No city in Europe would reach that population again for over 1,500 years. You have running water in your home and think nothing of it. Rome had 11 major aqueducts feeding public fountains, private baths, and multi-story apartment buildings called insulae, some of which rose 6 stories high. 6 stories. In a city with no elevators, no steel frames, no modern concrete reinforcement. Here's the part that quietly reframes everything. The empire wasn't one culture wearing a toga. It was a patchwork held together by administration, not identity. A merchant in Gaul spoke Latin for trade, but Celtic at home. A soldier from North Africa could rise to become emperor, as Septimius Severus did in the year 193. A woman in Egypt could still worship Isis while paying taxes to Rome. The empire didn't erase difference, it organized it. That organization required something almost invisible to modern eyes: bureaucracy, tax records, census data, legal codes translated and enforced across wildly different regions. You think of Rome and picture soldiers and gladiators. But the true engine of an empire this size was paperwork. Endless mundane paperwork, carried on wax tablets and papyrus, moving along those same roads, in the same relay. Speed is where the scale becomes almost unbelievable. Using the cursus publicus, the state-run courier and transport system, urgent messages could travel up to 50 miles a day. A letter from Rome could reach the province of Britain in around 2 to 3 weeks. In an age with no telegraph, no railway, no engine of any kind, that is staggering. It means an emperor sitting in Rome could issue an order and expect it enforced on the other side of the known world within a single month. Why did it stay this large for so long? Not because of endless conquest. By the 2nd century, expansion had mostly stopped. What held the empire together after that wasn't the sword. It was the road, the aqueduct, the shared currency, and a legal system so effective that conquered peoples often preferred Roman rule to constant tribal warfare. Historian Greg Wolfe, who has studied how Roman identity spread through provinces rather than being forced onto them, describes this process less as domination and more as gradual absorption, where local elites adopted Roman customs because it was useful, not because they had no choice. And still, you probably pictured this empire smaller than it was. That's not a failure on your part. It's how your brain handles anything beyond your own direct experience. A number like 2 million square miles doesn't mean anything until you turn it into a walk across a continent, or a letter crossing an ocean in a month, or 1 in every 4 humans on Earth living under one government. Think about your own city right now. Somewhere beneath the street you're standing on, or near it, there may be pipes carrying water you never think about, roads engineered decades ago that you never question, systems so reliable you forget they exist. That's exactly what Roman infrastructure was to the people living inside it. Invisible, until you imagine it gone. The empire eventually did fall, or rather fractured slowly over centuries, its western half collapsing by 476, its eastern half continuing on as Byzantium for another 1,000 years. But its scale never really disappeared. Roads the Romans built still form the base layer under modern highways in parts of Europe. Legal principles they wrote still echo in courts today. Language, government, city planning, all quietly shaped by an entity that once held 1 in 4 people on Earth under a single rule. So tonight, when you open that map app and a city loads in half a second, remember what that same distance once meant. A month on horseback. A network of stone roads stretching further than you can walk in a lifetime. And a single empire so vast, so interconnected, that a soldier on a wall in northern England and a farmer along the Euphrates were technically neighbors.